darlings. Welcome to Titular Characters. I am the adorable Eva Webb, and in this issue, we're featuring the incredible Tom Brevoort. It turns out that Tom Brevoort is the code name of America's darling, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world. Their battle cry, "Yo, Brevoort!" can be heard as they go into battle with the forces of evil. Tom's also the senior vice president of publishing and longtime editor at Marvel Comics. How are you, Tom?
I'm all right. How are you?
I am loving life. I just wanted to tell you that it is an honor to have the great Tom Brevoort on my show. I can't think of anybody I've ever interviewed who has as many comics to their credit as you do. I mean, it's pushing 5,000 titles now, isn't it?
I don't have that count, so I will trust that your research and that is accurate. But yeah, there aren't many like me left in the world.
So you went to art school. You were actually planning on becoming an artist.
Yeah, I have an art background, and it wasn't quite art school. It was the University of Delaware, which is a general college, but I was in the illustration program. They have a strong art program at the U of D, and I went there for art. Yes.
How did you end up at Marvel of all places?
Well, it's a time-worn story at this point. You see, in the illustration program at the University of Delaware, in your senior year, or really like in the summer between your junior year and senior year, somewhere in there, you needed to serve an internship someplace related to the field, with something that was applicable to what you were trying to do. And at the original first orientation for the program, the dean of the college came out and explains to every incoming class, here are the steps, and the first 2 years are your foundation, and your third year you're going to specialize in a particular kind of art making or illustration, and then in your fourth year you do this internship. And at the orientation, the dean of the college said, well, we've had people who've interned here and here and here, and we even had one person who interned at Marvel Comics. And I thought to myself in the crowd at that point, okay, that'll be me in 4 years. And so the time came up, and I sent out not just to Marvel, but to all of the extant comic book companies of the period, so DC and Comico and whatever there happened to be, at least on the East Coast where I could kind of get to it. And the only one I heard back from was Marvel. So I ended up becoming a college intern at Marvel in the summer of 1989. I did it for about 3 months, working across 3 editorial offices. And by the time I was finished as an intern, there were enough people on staff that liked me and saw that I had a bunch of applicable skills. And so they were very concerned with trying to get me on staff full time. And by the end of the year, by December of 1989, I was hired at Marvel as an assistant editor. And so I've been there ever since.
And in your time there, you've worked on pretty much every category of Marvel book. Do you have a favorite?
Well, my favorite Marvel book had always been and has always been Fantastic Four. So it was kind of a big deal around about 2002, I guess it was, when I ended up taking over that title editorially. And now, on and off, I've edited Fantastic Four longer than any other human being. I've done more Fantastic Four books than anybody else in history, which is an accomplishment until you learn that I've done twice as many Avengers books as the next nearest competitor. I've been on Avengers even longer, and I now have lapped the next runner-up candidate 2-1, and I think I'm starting. I haven't calculated it in a while. I think I'm starting to get near to 3-1.
That is absolutely incredible.
It's just a testament to stamina and longevity and dumb luck as much as anything else.
How do ideas happen at Marvel?
Well, ideas happen. I mean, there are a number of different sorts of ideas. There's the idea for a particular story with an established character. There's the idea for a new character or a new sort of title that we're not publishing at the moment. You know, there are ideas for how to best make use out of creators that are under Marvel's aegis. There's ideas that are in the service of some other line of business that requires synergy. There are ideas that are in the service of strategic alliances with other, companies or IP holders. The real honest answer is ideas kind of come from everywhere, and it depends the specifics of a particular instance. You can often talk about, oh, here's where this came from, or here's where that came from. But typically on a regular day, I'm tossing off ideas, most of them bad, almost 8 hours a day in reaction or response to whatever happens to be going on. And hopefully, given that it's a fairly creative maelstrom of stuff, enough good ideas come out in the mix of all of that to make our book successful and our stories well told and so forth. Ideas are one of those things that are often misunderstood, particularly by people from outside of the creative industries. The idea, it's not nothing, but it's probably the least part of what goes into making a comic, because you can have the best idea in the world, but it's really about what you do with that idea, how you execute that idea and expand on it and flesh it out and make it a real thing, as much as it is the value of the idea itself. I know that, back in the before times when we used to go to conventions, every once in a while I would run into young, aspiring, would-be comic book creators who would tell me that they have the greatest idea ever for a thing and that they've been working on it for 6 years and it's the perfect and nobody's ever done anything like this and all. And I kind of tell them, like, that's great, but that's sort of wasted effort. Okay, you've got the idea, but you actually have to actualize that idea for it to have value. You can have what you think is a terrific idea, but certainly we've seen over the years, not just in comics, but across all media, lots of good ideas that were executed poorly or executed in a way that did not live up to their potential. And we've certainly seen instances where the idea for something seemed kind of dumb on the surface of it, that turned into enormous successes and became incredibly popular, that nobody would have thought was a good idea when you started out. I mean, you go as far back as Superman. Superman was a strip and an idea that was rejected for 5 years before somebody eventually went, yeah, okay, we got to fill 64 pages. Let's try the guy in the tights. And suddenly every publisher in America was racing to put out their own taped crime fighting.
One thing I really love and appreciate about Marvel over the last probably 10 or 15 years or so is how hard you guys are working on diversity and representation. What was the spark? When did you realize that was important?
Well, on a certain level, I would say that Marvel's always realized that was important, and Marvel has always been a leader in that field. You go back to the 60s when Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and all the other Marvel founding fathers were beginning to come up with all of the characters that make up the Marvel universe, most of whom are still the bedrock today. And, in that period, they were really the first company to feature African-American characters, or characters of color at all, at a time when that was not only a thing that was sort of just not done, but actually potentially could have impacted on their sales in certain areas of the country. And so that legacy of trying to be inclusive and trying to create stories for everybody is kind of baked into the Marvel DNA going all the way back. That said, over the course of, and I don't know that I can pinpoint a specific moment, but over the course of the last decade or so, the last 10 years, there's definitely been a renewed interest and focus as, in part as the Marvel characters in the Marvel brand has become far more globally recognized. Before Marvel was a renowned purveyor of film, it was a long storied company, but people in all corners of the globe didn't know who or what Marvel was in the way that they do now. And I think partly as a response to that, and a response to the fact that there was a whole influx of people from all different sorts of backgrounds and walks of life and religions and orientations and you name it, who were suddenly interested in what Marvel was doing, that sort of opened up the gateways and began us more widely, not just trying to develop characters from across a wide spectrum, but also to find and recruit talented creators from across that spectrum who could bring their individual life experiences to Marvel and help broaden the appeal of what we do.
I asked Tom Payer this, and he sort of looked at me funny. But what is, just for sort of the layman in the audience, what does an editor do? What's the job?
Well, the way I describe it to people in interviews like this one is that it's like being a combination of the manager and the coach of a professional sports team. And by that, I mean, I don't go out on the field and play the game. I don't write the comics and I don't draw the comics, nor really should I, despite whatever meager artistic background I have. But I do get to choose who does play the game. I get to decide who plays what position, and I can switch the players around or substitute a player in whenever I think that's necessary or warranted. I can call a particular play on the field. I can change the team uniforms. It's my responsibility to make sure that the team is where it's supposed to be, that it gets to whatever the ballpark is in whatever place it is on time and ready to go out and play. And if anything goes wrong anywhere within that sphere of responsibility, ultimately the buck stops here and the responsibility is mine. So that, in a nutshell, is broadly what an editor does as opposed to anybody else. I also tell people that the key difference between the writer and the editor in terms of working on a character or book stories is that the writer's first loyalty is always to their story, to the story that they're trying to actualize. Whereas the editor's first loyalty is to the book, and that's not always the same thing. Often those two objectives are aligned and coincide, but if you're going to be editing, at least in what we think of as mainstream monthly comic books, out of Marvel or DC or a Dark Horse or what have you, chances are you as an editor are going to outlast a set of creators on a particular character or property and have to then recruit or bring in other creators. And sometimes you'll be the one who gets to decide, and sometimes has to decide, that so and so has stayed to the end of their welcome and they're done, and it's time to make a change.
I bet that's challenging. Like there have been a couple of writers at Marvel that have worked on books for 10 years or longer. When do you know it's time?
It's a it's an instinct. It's a gut level instinct more than anything. And certainly there have been people who have come off of runs, regardless of how long they are, that may have had more juice in the tank, but somebody somewhere, the editor, somebody else further up the editorial food chain, the vagaries of what was going on somewhere else may have impacted on that. But it's the responsibility of each editor over the characters and the titles that they oversee to determine that. And again, that's all carried out under the aegis of the editor-in-chief and whatever other hierarchy of editorial people there might be. Nobody knows 100% anything. So it is all instinct as to when somebody has done the best that they're going to do, and when a title needs to be refreshed with an influx of new creative talent. Often, and it's very mercenary, but it's very real, often the sales numbers will give you an indicator of that. And the response to every issue as it comes out will give you a barometer on that as well, whether or not the audience as a whole is reacting well to what you're doing. But the ultimate solution is not always to relieve a creative team of duty and bring in somebody else. There's a myriad of ways you could combat either reader fatigue or just a lack of something that's connecting. But it ultimately falls to the editor to decide that a tenure is up.
Do you move a lot on fan reaction?
Yes and no. And by that I mean, yes, we're always listening to and taking on board what the audience is talking about. And certainly, we love to hear the chatter on Wednesday as new titles come out and readers up and down the spectrum begin to react to what's going on, positively and negatively. Where I think that gets deceptive is almost every individual audience member feels like their opinion is the right one, as they should. You read something, you watch something, you attend something, and it's your experience. And if you enjoyed it, that's great. And if you didn't enjoy it, you're not happy with that. The thing is, editorially, we're looking at everything and we're listening to everyone. And so one individual voice can be substantive, but more so when they're one voice among a lot of voices that feel the same way. There's also a tendency among human beings and fans of any of these sorts of things to say one thing but do another. At any given point, you'll find a lot of people who are generating petitions for whatever thing they're trying to accomplish. And petitions are easy. You come to me and say, hey, will you sign this petition for blah, blah, blah. It takes me 2 seconds. I feel like I've taken action. I'm on the right side of history. I'm doing good. But that's different from actually doing something. It doesn't amount to that a lot. It's easy. It's much harder to get me to stand up and go across the way and buy something or pay for something or make something or agitate for something. And so the difference between what I say I want, whatever the petition says, and what I'm actually going to act upon is a span. And editorially, you kind of have to be paying more attention to what the audience is doing rather than what they're saying. The audience, and I don't mean to, belittle them. These are people often who've been following these books for years and years and years and have a great understanding of the characters, and they certainly know what they like and what they don't like. But quite often the audience doesn't actually know what it wants. That's why they're the audience. What they really want is they want to be entertained and they want to be enthralled and they want to be invested in these characters that are really just lines on paper that somehow become real human beings in their mind's eye. And if you can do that, whether or not you're following the letter of whatever they say they want, that's the spirit of what they're always saying. And that'll always work.
How does the status quo at Marvel work with Mantles and superheroes? I heard the The saying is that, if you don't like what's going on with a superhero right now, just wait 5 minutes and it'll get reset or something. Is that true, or is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's more nuanced than that. I don't, while there are certainly long running status quos for any of the major characters in comics, Marvel and outside of Marvel, it's also true that new things are developed and new developments do take hold and last over the course of time. It's just ultimately it's really a question of what strikes the audience's fancy, over the long haul. There are certainly stories that end up having a shelf life and running their course, and then things are reversed because, for one reason or another, whatever that classic status quo is, enough people miss it, or there's a feeling of it being gone or being lost, or whatever interim story or what interim status quo there had been has itself kind of played itself to its natural conclusion. But it's not a foregone conclusion. I think people in and around the comics industry tend to be a little jaded, and I think that's natural. I've read comics since 1973, so I've seen a lot of this stuff, and it certainly is difficult to convince me that any particular change to a character or a series is a permanent one or a long lasting one. But that doesn't mean it doesn't actually happen. It just these things tend to be more like a pendulum swing. Things go one way and then they go another way, and sometimes it's back and forth. I think there's always a nostalgic pull to whatever is considered the classic status quo of any given character, but it's not an absolute thing. Probably the best, most successful example of that is the X-Men. The X-Men haven't been Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Iceman, Beast, and Angel since 1975. Those characters have all been in it, and they've all played a role at one point or another. But once you hit 1975 and that title was reinvented as the all new, all different X-Men with Wolverine and Storm and Colossus and Nightcrawler, that iteration supplanted the original X-Men as the baseline status quo. And so now every time things shift, they tend to shift back to that rather than the earlier X-Men. Same sort of thing largely with Daredevil. For 20 years, Daredevil was a sightless crusader, very much in the mold of Spider-Man. And it wasn't really until Frank Miller came in and gave the series a more noir sort of sensibility to it that really made an impact. And suddenly that was the status quo that everybody moves back to. And so much so that these days, if you try to do a Daredevil that's like the original, first 15 or 20 years of the run, people will be entertained by it, but there'll be an expectation and even a desire to shift back into a more noirish sort of approach sooner or later. But these changes happen, and they have lasted the test of time. So it certainly can happen. You just can't always predict which ones are going to stick and which ones are not, and which things are stories and which things are permanent. But that's part of the fun, the whole draw with a lot of these characters and these stories is what happens next. And if you know always what's going to happen next, then there's no reason to keep reading.
So you're out there on the field putting together plays for your team, to use that metaphor. And how do you know? Do you develop an instinct for which people, which teams are going to work the best together?
Well, I feel like casting a particular title is 90% of the job. I don't exaggerate by that. I legitimately think, if you cast it properly, 90% of your problems go away. And if you don't, there's only going to be so much you can do to make up the difference. Unfortunately, it's not science. It's all alchemy. And so the best you get is you develop an instinct. You start to develop an eye for talent. Theoretically, anybody that's coming in as an editor, even a younger editor, an assistant editor, which is our Marvel's entry-level editorial position, because presumably they have some experience with reading comic book material has some sense of what they like and whose work has resonated with them and who they'd like to work with. Beyond that, it just becomes a muscle that's honed by use over time. I really don't know that I could describe the process by which I cast talent on a particular title. And even that process of casting will vary from instance to instance and from title to title. I seem to have a track record of it that's relatively good, which doesn't mean that every book I put together is a rousing success, but enough of them are where I have a halfway decent batting average. But in terms of actually articulating and teaching somebody to do it, it's all instinctive, and it's all trial and error, and it's listening to the people around you, and it's absorbing as wide a variety of experiences from the potential talent that's out there. And it's really just kind of having a gut sense. It's no different in a way than casting a movie or a television show or whatever. Who would best play Sherlock Holmes? The answer is a lot of different people at a lot of different times, and some of them would play it poorly. But being able to find the right person who could bring something to that role and speak to an audience in that particular moment is the whole of the game. But I find it very difficult to actually articulate how I do it. Not because it's a secret, but because literally so much of it is instinctive.
Do artists and writers and creative teams just ever produce something that's just so far above the bar that it blows you away? Well, what's that feeling like when it happens?
Well, that's kind of the thing you want and what you're striving for every single time. There's certainly an inevitable churn or grind to the idea that you're shepherding monthly titles, and that means every year you're going to make 12 of them. And you're going to make 12 of all of them at the same time. And it's a constant treadmill to keep those books coming out, to make sure you're meeting your ship dates and that you have all the pages that you need and everything is colored and lettered and on store shelves when the audience shows up to partake. But within that, I never step up to the plate on a project without a sort of baseline desire to make something for the ages. Typically, at any given point, there are comic book stories that last now, particularly in a world where we have collected editions, trade paperbacks, and digital, for years and years and years and years, and are successful today as they were, if not more successful, than when they were first published. And so every time out of the box, that's what I'm trying to do. You can't do it every time, and that doesn't mean you won't put out some stinky comics along the way, because everybody does, and it's not for anybody's lack of trying. But I never approach a book like, this is the one I'm going to phone in. This is the one where I'm just looking for a double. I know there are other editors maybe who do that and who concentrate their efforts on a couple of things that they love, and the other stuff is stuff that they just have to do as part of their job or whatnot. But that's never really been my outlook on it. Regardless of what the thing is, I believe in a philosophy where there are three components to the editor's job at a major company. It boils down to understand the mission, accept the mission, accomplish the mission. Understand the mission is the first part. Knowing what it is that's trying to be achieved with this particular project that you're doing. Whether it's a project that was handed to you from somebody higher up in the organization, or that came in the door and that you shepherded from a creator, or just a crazy idea that you had yourself one morning walk into work. Understanding what that is and what the goal is, not just for yourself, but for the organization, for the company, for everybody involved as a whole. And these are often the places where there's a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forth. And that back and forth revolves around, is this the best way to do this? Is this story innovative enough? Is it intelligent enough? Is it surprising enough? Does it have enough twists and turns? Does it speak to the underlying metaphor of the series? Is it cool? Is it visual? Does it check all the boxes? And there are always a whole bunch of people around who have a lot of different opinions and insights and whatnot on this. And as the editor, you're a strong voice in that, but you're not the only voice. And at a certain point, though, the switch has to be thrown, which is to say that, you know, whatever calls there were to be made, the umpire has made them. This is now the thing that you're making. And your whole ethos needs to switch from understanding the mission and arguing out the finer points of it to accomplishing the mission. And that means that in certain instances, there may have been things that are baked into your story that you're not 100% on board with, that you might have done a slightly different way, but for whatever reason it may be, some senior editorial presence or the creators themselves or whomever have argued effectively to the powers that be that this is the way we're going to do this, and or the powers that be have said, well, we need it to do this. We need this project to cover these three things. And so there's a point in which you argue and dice back and forth on that sort of thing to try and get to the result that's pleasing to you. But at a certain point, you have to switch gears and go, right, this is the thing we're making. And therefore, I need to make it the best possible version of that I can do.
So does digital change the way Marvel approaches the production process, just in general?
Well, I don't know that digital itself does. Certainly over the years, just with the rise of technology, more and more of making comics has become a digital process. There are still creators who work on paper with actual pencils and actual ink. But even those creators ultimately scan those drawings into a computer, if only you send them digitally to us from around the world. I don't know that you could easily find a comic produced these days that doesn't have some digital component to it, even if it's just the printing. So that's tended to shift everything. It certainly made the world smaller and made our talent pool more global, because the days when you were working on physical boards tended to mean you needed to live close enough to where the publishers were to be able to get your work in on a regular basis. Whereas now, it literally doesn't matter where on Earth you live. And theoretically, even the moon or other planets, once we get there, so long as you can, digitally zap your work across internet lines into my inbox and I can use it. There's no difference between somebody that lives in Manhattan and somebody that lives in Zimbabwe on a day-to-day basis anymore. Apart from that, digital is it's another distribution platform. It opens up the potential to capture other audiences and other readers who either don't have easy access to a local comic specialty shop and don't want to order through mail order or what have you, or don't want to wait for trade paperbacks and hardcover collections and things that want the thing now, or are just more comfortable with the format because they've grown up reading webtoons and other online forms of comics. It broadens the audience. The one thing that we've seen fairly definitively is that it's an additive audience, that offering digital versions of our various titles didn't erode the actual circulation figures on the tangible books. And we sort of make the assumption that it's not the same people buying and reading the digital version and then immediately running out and buying a physical copy as well. There might be some of those, but by and large, it's two different overlapping audiences. And so it's just another area by which you can capture a readership.
So another thing that's happened over the last 20 years or so is Marvel has gone from a company that had a house style to a company that promotes any number of styles. Marvel just sort of lets people be creative and do what they do best. Was that intentional, or did it come over time?
I think it came naturally. Although I would maybe argue a little bit as to whether Marvel had a house style. I know what you mean when you say that. There was definitely a traditional way that mainstream superhero comics looked, and some of them still look that way and are still drawn that way. And certainly the boundaries of what is considered acceptable artwork in a mainstream superhero comic has changed over the years, and we've opened up to a lot of different styles. I don't know that there was a specific thing as much as it was there's just a whole new generation of young artists who come into the field who are influenced by a wider array of influences than had been before. Certainly, the rise of manga in the 90s meant that there were a whole bunch of people who grew up reading manga and watching anime and being influenced in their approach to character design and storytelling and so forth by that as much, if not more, than the traditional style of Marvel Comics. And that sort of diversity has only grown. Plus, as the audience becomes more conversant and more comfortable with that wide range of styles, it becomes easier for there to be acceptance for a broad range of people doing stuff. But I mean, you can go back into the 1980s, and Bill Sienkiewicz was doing wildly abstract and avant-garde work on a lot of the books that he did. And Frank Miller, while there are certain conventions that he followed in drawing a Daredevil or a Dark Knight or a Ronin, um, he also was not in the mold of what we would consider a typical superhero artist of that period, and whatever the golden thing was that everybody was trying to achieve. So yeah, we like to have a wide range of styles, provided that the underlying attributes and aspects of the character are still maintained. And certainly, I only expect that to grow more in the coming years. I look at something like the Into the Spider-Verse movie that kind of took that sort of an approach and applied it in animation. And there's a whole generation of young people who watched that film at a transformative time in their lives that 10 or 15 years later are going to come in doing their own comics, and they'll bring that wider appreciation for a broader range of styles with them.
For what it's worth, I'm in my early 40s, and I saw Into the Spider-Verse, and the experience was magical. It did something for me that it sort of brought this sense of wonder and awe that I hadn't felt from comics in a very long time. I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a really good film. Like it's good even beyond the visual spectacle of it. Like it's a very nicely put together story, and it's got a point of view, it's got a message, but graphically and design wise, they do some wonderfully incredible things in the course of those 2 hours. None of that's anything that anybody in Marvel Publishing can take any particular credit for, other than, well, Brian and Sarah Kelly invented Miles Morales, but visually, it's very much all on those guys and those creators and what they did with it. It was a pretty cool thing to see.
Is there a push within Marvel's comic book publishing department to match up with the things that are happening in the movies, or does it work both ways? Where are the decisions made?
It does work both ways, and pretty much those decisions are made by us, by Marvel editorial. Going all the way up to editor in chief C.B. Sapolsky and Joe Quesada and Dan Buckley and so forth. We have yeah, we haven't actually had a physical one now in a year, but we would regularly go out and meet with Kevin Feige and the Marvel Studios team, once or twice a year, just to, kind of bring everybody up to speed on what we're doing, because they are situated on the West Coast and Marvel editorial is on the East Coast. And, all the way through every one of those interactions, Kevin's point of view on what we do has remained consistently the same. The last thing he wants is for us to be following them. What he wants is for us to be coming up with the new stories that will then become the raw material for the next flight of Marvel films and Disney Plus shows and whatever stuff is being developed out there. We have a real advantage, and it's a disadvantage too. But we have an advantage in that for studios, they make one Captain America story every 2 years, and I make 2 or 3 Captain America stories every month. So, for one thing, my churn has to happen faster. We're going through a lot more ideas and story approaches and so forth under a given period of time than anything else. But it makes for a very effective story laboratory for Kevin and his team of guys to be able to look through and find the different pieces that appeal to them or that work, and then to take them and apply them to what they're doing going forward. So there's never a big internal push to go, oh, everything here has to remain lockstep. That all having been said, our creators and editors are just as much fans as anybody else. The success and the power that the Marvel Studios films have had, and even the Marvel films before that. Now, one of the big transformative changes, and the one we point to an awful lot, was after the first X-Men film, everybody just started drawing Cerebro like it was in the movie, because the version in the film was much cooler and more visual than the version that had been in the comics up to that point. And it wasn't anybody editorially or company-wide saying, this is what Cerebro has to look like now. It was all the artists who came out of that experience going, okay, Panel 6, Professor X goes into Cerebro and puts on the helmet and reaches out to find mutants. And that's what they drew, because that's the coolest thing. So it is a symbiotic relationship. Certainly, if we know that there are characters or things that are going to be popping up in upcoming studios releases, or that have just been in studios releases and gotten a bit of attention or buzz or audience interest, we're not stupid. We're going to try to take advantage of that. So it's not a coincidence that we just launched an Eternals series, and there's an Eternals movie that's coming out at some point. That said, our Eternals book is not the film version. It's our book, and hopefully somewhere within that are the seeds of something that the studios team will make into Eternals 2 or Eternals 3. And that could provide greater value and equity even beyond just being a comic in Marvel Publishing. So it's not one or the other. As you say, it's a little of one and a little of the other, but it's not a mandated thing so much as it is, often good business sense and just the fact that the movies and TV shows that those guys put together are pretty cool and people like them, including us.
That's neat. You're sort of the center of the world in a lot of ways. Like on the one hand, you've got like these comics legends. You've worked with all of them, just like every single one. And on the other, you've got the Marvel Studios people. Is there ever a point where you just fanboy a little?
Yes, but no. Like, it's the requirement of my job to, get done or accomplish whatever has to be accomplished. It's all it's all a very cool thing. It's a very cool thing to be the guardian and the shepherd of these characters that I read and loved when I was a kid. And it's cool to be surrounded by all of these talented people. But that also doesn't mean that the day may not come when, for some reason, I have to metaphorically shoot some legend in the face, and that's just the nature of being the editor. The editor is the grown up in the room, and the editor is the bad guy, and sometimes that means you're going to have to take on or take out somebody who is a storied and historic creator. So yeah, I definitely and we definitely are not casual about the fact that we've gotten to work with all sorts of great and storied people. That having been said, they're all just people, and it's fun, it's cool, but it's also the work of making the comics and connecting with the next generation of readers and so forth and so on.
Does the experience of editing comics change the way you read comics as a fan?
I think it can't help but do that. And I typically, when I'm reading comics for pleasure or watching television or going to a movie or whatnot, I've sort of developed this instinct where I sort of turn that part of my brain off as much as is possible. And it's never possible to do it 100%, but I don't need to be sitting there analyzing the story structure of what's going on, or figuring out where the problems are. And that was a place that could have been done better. But it's almost inevitable because you're so used to viewing this material through that kind of lens. Like, the one difference is that most of the stuff that I do in terms of the work is done before a comic book is a finished comic book. So, reading a script is different than reading an actual comic, and going through art is different than reading an actual comic. And even when you're at the stage where you're fine-tuning lettering and coloring and putting everything together, it's not exactly the same as just reading a book. Like every comic book reader, I have strong opinions about all sorts of things and biases that come into play when I'm reading stuff. But I'm certainly able to sit down and enjoy reading books. And I used to go to the shop once a week on Wednesday like clockwork. And the pandemic has sort of put a crimp in that for the last year. But instead, I now have the shop sending me a bundle of new books every week instead. So I'm still reading things, and things beyond Marvel books, in real time on a regular, like, weekly release schedule. I can segregate those two things in my head, or at least I think that I can.
So what are you reading right now?
Well, right this second, I'm not reading anything. I'm on a Zoom call. Well, that's fine. I had to go across the room. As I was saying, I had to go over to. I have a to-be-read shelf, and I got a bundle of books in yesterday, I think. So let's see what's actually in this stack waiting to be read. There's an issue of, can't find the issue number, there's an issue of Commanders in Crisis by Steve Orlando. The third issue of Casual Fling from Upshot. Firepower, again, I can't find in this dim light the issue number, but that's Chris Samney and Bob Kirkman. The first issue of Jeff Johns and Gary Frank Geiger. An issue of Crime Syndicate, written by my old associate editor, Andy Schmidt. An issue of The Resistance Uprising by JMS and C.P. Smith for Upshot. Second issue of Nocterra by Scott Snyder. The Silver Coin, issue 1 by Chip Zdarsky and Michael Walsh. An issue of Tom Taylor's Seven Secrets, and the first issue of the next Batman Second Son by John Ridley and company. Plus, there are
Nice.
trade paperbacks and things that also came in. I got a Greatest Superman Team Ups book this week, and a smaller, almost digest size Batman the Animated Series collection from when we were doing the comics on that. And I think maybe one other thing. But the real answer is I'm reading a lot, and that's why this to be read shelf is as shelf-like as it is. There's a lot of material.
Is there a particular title, issue, or story that is your favorite thing of all time?
I don't know that there's one. I have read a great deal of comics over the years, and I've liked a great deal of comics over the years, and I still do. So there are characters and titles and things that I have an affinity for. My favorite superhero is the Flash, and has been since I was like 6 years old. So there are certainly Flash stories that resonate with me. My favorite Marvel title has always been Fantastic Four. And so there are things there that resonate with me. But, the same thing is true with more, newfangled material as well. I'm a big follower of the work that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips have been doing over the last couple of years on their various series. Most currently Reckless, but before that Criminal and Incognito and so forth and so on. I read a lot of stuff. There's a surprising amount of good material that's out there, and that's still coming out every month. So I like a lot of things that I don't know that I could boil it ever down to just here's one. You're going to be on a desert island. Here's your one comic. The one comic I would like to have on a desert island would be the first and only issue of How to Build a Raft to Get Off a Desert Island using only this comic.
Oh, that would be great.
So that's the one and only title I want there.
Well, Tom, we're up against the end of the show, so are you ready for the fun and silly questions?
Sure.
So what's your favorite food?
These sorts of favorite questions always befuddle me, in that they all should be simple answers and nobody really cares. Like, there's no wrong answer I could give you. I could say literally anything and presumably I'd be right. And yet I sweat these like nobody's business. I'll say for the masses, I will say that probably I eat more pizza than anything else.
Nice. Would you say you're a cat person or a dog person?
Certainly more of a dog person. Although my current dog is really trying that association. He's not always as well behaved as I would like him to be.
He sounds adorable from what I can hear of him in the background.
Now, the fact that you can hear him in the background is part of the problem.
So what's the best swear word?
Balderdash.
I love that one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That is indeed the best swear word. So what inspires you?
Well, certainly, paying the mortgage and putting food on the table is a good thing. Staying alive, staying above water.
What brings you joy?
Oh, I wish I knew. I certainly like it when a comic that I work on comes out particularly well, and you get to hold the finished product in your hands, and people like it.
If you could change one detail about life on planet Earth, what would it be?
Well, right now I'm kind of a little sick of this pandemic we have going on, so we could get rid of that, and that'd be just great.
That would be amazing. Okay, so here's the one we talked about earlier, and you've gotten this like a few different ways from a bunch of different people, but humor me for a second. So, like,
Sure.
if you wake up one morning and you're imbued with superpowers, what are those powers, and what do you choose to do with them?
Well, I'm sure. I don't know. This is good. I can answer this. This is no problem. I think if you asked me that at different points in my life, I would give you different answers. And often I would give you different answers just depending on what my mood happened to be, I think. Um, these days, uh, because I'm old and the appeal of most other powers, is slightly more lost on me. I don't particularly have to fight anybody anymore. Uh, there are no physical conflicts in my life for the most part. I think the power that would be most useful to me on a day-to-day basis would be the ability to understand and speak all languages.
Nice, that would be a great superpower, extremely useful, just talk to anybody.
Yep, but I can't do it. So
Would that
it's
include would that like include written communication as well?
oh well, certainly it would include anything that anything that I wanted it to, because as the editor, I could decide that it did.
There you go. I love that. So, do you see yourself being especially heroic with it, or are you somebody who is not especially heroic in general?
I think anybody who has ever dealt with me will tell you I am not particularly heroic. I'd get good use out of it, but that would probably be personal use rather than altruistic use. It's not like I'd be using it for anything, nefarious or evil or anything. But I would make more personal use out of it than do anything that would benefit mankind or anything like that.
So, 100 years from now, NASA takes everything you've ever worked on and stuffs it into a space capsule, assuming it all fits, of course. And at some point in the later future in deep space, that capsule's floating around. Aliens get a hold of it. What's their thought? What do they think of these great comics?
I don't know that they understand any of them. In the same sort of way that if you've ever read comics in a language other than your own, obviously it's not the full experience. And even if you're talking about aliens, their their uh, their point of view, their society, their understanding of existence is likely profoundly different than whoever was working on whatever issue of Iron Man they happen to pull out of that capsule. So I'm sure they're befuddled by it. Hopefully they're at least impressed with the size of the capsule. Although being interplanetary aliens, they're probably not. Their ship is likely larger.
True, true. So that's it, Tom. Thank you for joining me on my humble little podcast. Where can people find you online?
Well, I'm on Twitter as Tom Brevoort, cleverly disguised as Tom Brevoort. I also have my webpage that is tombrevoort.com, where I routinely do reviews of the comics I read when I was a kid and other sort of historical manner of things relating to the early Marvel days or the history of comics and so forth. And just a couple of weeks ago, I started uploading videos to YouTube. So there's a YouTube channel where the people that aren't easily scared and can actually stand to look at my face for 6 minutes can experience, a more visual version of things relating to the history of comics, in addition to a series that I'm doing that's kind of an expansion of a talk I give every year to the young Marvel editors about the philosophy of editing comics and what the thought processes are, and what goes into it, what they need to know and understand to do the job effectively. So those are a bunch of places. You can't find me so often anymore at or around the Marvel offices or in Manhattan, but hopefully that'll change soon. Perhaps I'll eventually be back at conventions and things as well.
Well, babies, that's it. It's time to close the show. I wanted to say thank you for supporting us, for believing in us, and for encouraging us online. Titular Characters is a show about the things we love and about the people that make the magic behind it. It's produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. That's me. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. And we are looking for a new sound technician at the present time, so if you know anybody, have them DM me at Eva is Adorable for more details. And that's it, my babies. That's all we got. Join us next time for another exciting adventure in cyberspace. Oh, and when you do, bring candy. Love yous.